All right, gather round, you magnificent data nerds, because we're about to dissect a culinary revolution brewing in the land of dragons. And it's not your grandma's secret dumpling recipe. We're plunging into the, frankly, bonkers world of pre-prepared food in China. Get this. We're talking about a market that ballooned from a cool 350 billion RMB in 2021 to a projected trillion RMB by 2026. Trillion? That's enough pre-cut veggies to build a great wall of stir fry.
It's a seismic shift, really. It shows how a massive population feeds itself, reflecting this rapid evolution in lifestyles and consumption habits that we just can't afford to ignore.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, and you're already strapped in, so no ejecting. Now we're going to unravel this whole pre-prepared food saga in China. Like, what's charging this growth? What are the potential, food safety landmines we need to watch out for? And how does China's ready meal game compare to the, let's say, grizzled veterans on the global stage, like Japan and the U.S.?
Yeah, exactly.
We've got a treasure trove of intel here. Market analysis, deep dives, government pronouncements, the whole shebang. We're here to cut through the marketing fluff and serve up the real insights. Whether you're strategizing your next business move, aiming to drop some knowledge bombs at your next networking event, or just, fascinated by a massive economic and social trend, consider this your express ticket to being seriously informed. Okay, so let's kick things off with a deceptively simple question. What exactly are we talking about when we say pre-prepared food in China? It sounds straightforward, but like trying to nail down what the metaverse actually is, it feels a bit slippery.
That's a very insightful way to put it, because before 2024, the definition of pre-prepared food, or yuzukai, which literally translates to pre-made dishes, highlighting the core concept, was indeed pretty ambiguous in China. This lack of a clear, unified national definition created a sort of regulatory patchwork quilt. You had different players, authorities, consumers, all operating with potentially different understandings.
Right.
We saw various regional, industry group, and even company standards trying to fill the gap. But without that national consensus, consistency, and effective oversight, really challenging.
So it was a bit of a culinary free-for-all, everyone just winging it and calling their shot.
Pretty much, yeah. But then in March 2024, we saw a really significant step. 6 key government departments jointly issued this notice that, for the first time, gave a clear official definition at the national level. That was a landmark move, really aimed at getting everyone on the same page and building a more robust regulatory framework.
All right, spill the beans. What groundbreaking insights did these 6 wise departments deliver? What is pre-prepared food according to the official rulebook?
Okay, so according to this 2024 definition, it refers to packaged dishes. Agricultural products are the main ingredients. They might have seasonings, other stuff, but crucially, they have to undergo industrial pre-processing. So like mixing, marinating, rolling dough, shaping, frying, baking, boiling, steaming, that sort of thing. And here's a key part. The definition explicitly mandates they must not contain any added preservatives.
Oh.
They're pre-packaged, and you need to heat them or cook them more before eating. The notice also stressed they're both prefabricated and dishes, underlining that industrial process and their role as part of a meal.
No added preservatives, you say? That sounds like a direct nod to some of that consumer unease we've been hearing about. But wait a minute, what gets a hall pass from this definition? Because I'm picturing a world where suddenly my entire kitchen is either raw ingredients or something requiring a sous vide machine.
That's a very pertinent question. The 2024 notice was quite specific about exclusions. First off, everyday staple foods, think frozen dumplings, instant noodles, lunch boxes, rice bowls, steamed buns, pastries, meat sandwiches, bread, hamburgers, regular sandwiches, even pizza, they're all out.
Phew, my emergency dumplings survive.
Right. Secondly, simply cleaned, peeled, cut veggies that haven't been cooked or processed further, also not included. Thirdly, ready-to-eat cold dishes, like your standard veggie or fruit salads, they fall outside this. And finally, and this is maybe a bit controversial, like you hinted, food prepared by central kitchens just for their own chain restaurants is also excluded.
Okay, but that last one,
Yeah.
central kitchens, that still feels a bit like a loophole the size of the Grand Canyon, doesn't it? I
Right.
mean, if I'm eating at some mega chain and my freshly cooked whatever was mostly pre-assembled miles away, isn't that pre-prepared in spirit, even if it technically dodges this definition?
You've hit on a really critical point there. It's a potential disconnect between the legal definition and, well, the consumer's experience. Central kitchens are undeniably key for standardization and efficiency for chains.
Sure.
And while the 2024 rules draw a line based on packaging, And where it's sold prepackaged for retail versus internal supply, a diner probably won't see a huge difference if their meal parts arrived pre-portioned and part cooked. From their view, it's still not made from scratch right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, the legal line might not fully align with consumer expectations about freshness or prep methods when eating out. It's a nuance to watch.
Interesting. So the law is trying to draw lines in a very gray culinary area. Now, beyond this official decree, are there other ways the industry itself sorts this stuff in China? Like if I'm scrolling online groceries at 2 a.m., what labels might I see?
Oh, absolutely. Within the industry, you see various market-driven classifications. One notable one is from the China Food Science and Technology Society, CIFST. They propose a system based on main ingredients, meat, seafood, veggies, and storage temperature, room temp, chilled, frozen. It reflects their internal effort to bring some structure.
Makes sense. What's the star and how do we keep it fresh? Simple enough.
But in the consumer market, you're more likely to see classifications based on convenience. Typically things like ready to prepare, which is basically minimally processed raw stuff, often with seasoning packets you do all the cooking.
Right.
Then ready to cook, with partially cooked or marinated ingredients needing key steps like frying or boiling. Ready to heat, fully cooked, just needs reheating. And finally, ready to eat, shelf-stable, no prep needed at all.
Gotcha.
And it's important to remember that 2024 official definition, it mainly covers the ready-to-cook and ready-to-heat prepackaged meals.
Got it. So the government's focusing on the halfway there options, leaving the fully raw and the already chilled to their own devices, for now anyway. What about the rest of the planet? How does the world classify these convenience foods? Is it different everywhere?
Globally, classifications usually revolve around a few key things. One is product type, frozen meals, chilled, canned, shelf-stable, or ambient products. Another is meal type, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, and increasingly vegan and plant-based. And finally, distribution channels matter, supermarkets, convenience stores, online retailers, etc. These global categories give us a useful benchmark for comparison later on.
So how it's kept, what kind of meal it is, and where you buy it. Makes sense. And globally, what's the general vibe? Gourmet boxes or just fuel for the busy?
The general scope is meals pre-cooked or partially cooked needing minimal prep, usually just heating or a final cooking step. Frozen meals have a really big share globally. Supermarkets and hypermarkets are key channels worldwide. And like we touched on, there's been a huge surge in vegan and plant-based ready meals globally, reflecting those broader dietary shifts.
All right, we've mapped out the playing field, or maybe the dinner table. Now let's sink our teeth into the real meat. That meteoric rise of China's pre-prepared food market. Those growth figures you mentioned earlier were truly jaw-dropping. Is this trillion RMB market by 2026 actually possible, or is it wishful thinking?
The growth has been, well, nothing short of extraordinary. Like we said, from around 350 billion RMB in 2021 to nearly 420 billion in 2022. That's solid 21.3% growth. In 2023, it hit around 500 billion RMB, still growing strong at 15.9%. Some analyses even put the 2023 figure a bit higher, over 540 billion.
Wow.
The forecast for 2024 is over 560 billion, and yeah, that 1.072 trillion RMB prediction by 2026 is grabbing headlines. Some longer-term projections even talk about exceeding 3 trillion RMB if China matures like other developed markets.
That's frankly insane. But you also hinted this breakneck pace might be slowing, a predicted dip from 35% growth in 2024 down to 18.3% in 2026. That's still growth, obviously, but it's slowing down. What's tapping the brakes, even with those trillion yuan dreams?
That's a critical observation. While the long-term potential is massive, the expected slowdown suggests the market's hitting some friction. This likely comes from unresolved fundamental issues, especially consumer trust, which has been a big headwind for the consumer, the C2C side.
Right.
Plus, the business-to-business, the B2B market, which dominates now, might be nearing saturation in some areas. The initial explosion was really driven by B2B demand for efficiency and cost cuts, plus that C2C surge during lockdowns. But negative press, quality concerns, and the challenge of keeping customers, especially without fully addressing trust and taste, are likely factors in the slowdown.
Okay.
The 2024 regulations are basically trying to tackle these exact obstacles and build a stronger foundation for the next phase.
So the initial hype is fading, and now the industry needs to build a more reliable engine. Makes sense. Now let's dig into those driving forces. What's making both businesses and regular people jump on this bandwagon?
Yeah, there are distinct factors for B2B and C2C, plus important supply side and policy influences. Let's start with B2B, which has been the main engine so far.
Lay it on us. Why are restaurants and caterers so keen on these pre-made meals?
For businesses, especially in catering, cost reduction and efficiency are absolutely crucial. Pre-prepared foods can seriously cut labor costs, less kitchen staff needed, and reduce kitchen space, meaning lower rent.
Mm-hmm.
They also dramatically speed up prep and service time, faster table turnover, more customers. Raw material costs are huge for restaurants, and pre-prepared can offer more predictable, potentially lower costs through bulk buying and standardization.
Makes sense.
Plus, the rise of chain restaurants. They need consistent quality everywhere. Pre-prepared is vital for that. And think about new catering scenarios. Takeout, delivery, group meals, even rural banquets all benefit from the speed, convenience, and cost-effectiveness.
Right.
Finally, using pre-prepared components lets restaurants innovate menus faster. Kitchen staff can focus on signature dishes, outsourcing the routine stuff.
Okay, so for businesses, it's the holy trinity. Lower costs, faster service, consistent quality. Totally logical operationally. Now, what about the average person at home? Why are consumers choosing these instead of, cooking?
The C2C drivers are really tied to big lifestyle shifts.
Mm-hmm.
The fast pace of life, the rise of the lazy economy that demand for maximum convenience, smaller families, dual-income households, more singles, and aging population.
Yeah, the usual suspects.
All that creates a bigger need for quick, easy meal solutions. Many people just say traditional cooking takes too much time and effort now. The pandemic was a huge catalyst, too. Forced people home, many discovered the convenience. That formed new habits. A lot of consumers said they'd keep buying or buy more post-pandemic.
Right, I remember that.
Pre-prepared foods also seem to cater to diverse demands, at least in terms of variety and convenience, though, like we said, healthiness is debated. And don't forget the new retail channels, slick e-commerce, O2O services, community buying, live streaming. They've made these products way more accessible and helped educate consumers.
So who's buying this stuff mainly?
The core CN demographic is often women aged 31-40, but young Gen Z and seniors are becoming big growth segments too.
So, convenience wins in a fast world, boosted by digital shopping and a pandemic push. You also mentioned supply side and policy drivers. What's happening behind the scenes?
On the supply side, agriculture is getting more industrialized, giving a stable base of raw materials for large-scale production. Advances in food processing and packaging are crucial for quality, shelf life, safety, and the rapid growth of cold chain logistics is absolutely vital for transporting these sensitive products safely over distances. That sector is set for more big growth.
Makes sense. You need the infrastructure.
Policy-wise, the government explicitly mentioning cultivating and developing the pre-prepared food industry in the big 2023 Central Number 1 document. That sent a huge positive signal, attracted investment, encouraged development. Local governments added their own supportive policies too.
But there's a catch, right?
Exactly. There's a risk that this rapid policy-driven growth outpaces the development of solid standards and quality control. That can lead to inconsistent quality safety concerns, which we've seen. The 2024 regulations are partly a response to that, trying to ensure a more sustainable development.
Right. Government support is great, but you need the guardrails to stop things going off track or spoiling in transit. So we see the forces driving this. You said B2B dominates now. Is C2C gaining ground? What's the balance?
Currently, B2B absolutely commands a lion's share, maybe 80–85% of the market value. It's driven by those direct business needs, cost control, standardization. It's an easy adoption for them.
So restaurants, caterers are the big customers, but what about us folks at home? Are we starting to matter more?
Absolutely. Well, starting smaller, the C2C market has strong growth momentum. Its share went from maybe 15% in 2017 to potentially near 30% by 2025. We see platforms like Meituan Maikai, Ding Dong Maikai reporting big, consistent sales increases in pre-prepared. B2B growth is tied to catering industry trends, more chains, rising costs. But C2C expansion is more about those lifestyle changes, convenience, and crucially, building that consumer trust in quality and safety. The preferred products differ too. B2B often likes ready to cook or ready to prepare for some final customization in the kitchen.
Right.
C2C leans more towards fully cooked, ready-to-heat meals, minimal effort at home.
So B2B streamlines business. C2C maximizes convenience for busy people. But that heavy B2B reliance, does that make the market unstable? What if restaurants take a hit?
Precisely. That dependence makes the industry vulnerable to catering sector ups and downs. A recession, a shift in dining habits impacting restaurants that could significantly hit B2B demand. C2C, on the other hand, driven by those fundamental societal shifts, has greater long-term potential for resilient growth. But, as we keep saying, realizing that potential hinges on overcoming those trust and quality hurdles. We can look at markets like Japan, where C2C is much bigger, as a possible future for China if they fix these issues.
So B2B is the workhorse now, but C2C is the future marathon runner, just needing serious training and maybe better regulation and QC. Now, who's actually competing in this expanding arena? A few giants or a crowded kitchen?
It's notably highly fragmented and intensely competitive. A classic large industry, small company situation.
Hmm.
Market concentration is remarkably low. The top five companies, CR5, had only about 9.2% share in 2020. Compare that to Japan, where CR5 was like 64%.
Whoa.
The number of registered companies is staggering over 64,000 recently. Many are small players who jumped in recently, drawn by the growth hype. There are even concerns about overinvestment and lack of differentiation, leading to some homogenization.
Wow, 64,000 companies. Sounds less like a market and more like a flash mob in the frozen aisle. So, who are these contenders? Are they all different?
We can broadly group them to five main types. First, upstream agriculture aquatic producers like Shuanghui, Golian Aquatic Products. They have raw material advantages, large-scale processing, often B2B channels. Second, traditional frozen food companies like Enjoy, Senquan. They bring processing experience, supply chain management, brand building, existing distribution. Third, professional pre-prepared food companies like Xixiang, Kongchu. Their core focus is pre-prepared production and innovation, often starting with B2B.
Got it.
Fourth, catering enterprises themselves. Big names like Yum China, chains like Meizu Dongpo. They leverage brand recognition and taste knowledge. Finally, retail enterprises, online platforms like Dingdong Maikai, new retail like Freshippo, strong warehousing, logistics, direct consumer access, though maybe less in-house production.
So, a really diverse mix from farm to fridge. And you mentioned regional clustering, certain hubs.
Yes, noticeable geographic concentration. Guangdong, Shanghai, Beijing, Shandong have higher densities. Guangdong especially has an early mover advantage, strong agriculture, food processing, catering scene, supportive local policies.
Sounds dynamic if crowded. But you hinted this fragmentation might cause problems. How does that play out?
Precisely. High fragmentation makes it much harder to establish and enforce consistent quality standards, implement uniform safety controls, and foster significant R&D investment for real innovation. This directly feeds into that consumer distrust we keep talking about.
Right.
Each player type also has its own pros and cons. Looking ahead, as the market matures and regulations tighten like the 2024 changes, we expect more industry consolidation. Mergers, acquisitions, vertical integration. It's a natural evolution towards efficiency, standardization, and stronger national brands.
So smaller players might get swallowed as regulations bite harder. Sounds less like an orchestra, more like enthusiastic but out of sync musicians. Now let's shift to the less palatable stuff. Turbulence, challenges, controversies. What major storms has this market weathered?
The core issues casting a shadow are fundamental. Food safety concerns, lack of unified standards, that deep crisis of consumer trust, and a real lack of transparency.
Trust really is the recurring theme, isn't it? What specific things have eroded that trust so badly?
It's multifaceted, deeply rooted. First, persistent worries about excessive or illegal additives and preservatives, even with the 2024 ban on added ones in the official category. Old fears die hard. Second, ongoing worries about raw material quality, hygiene and processing plants, cross-contamination risks. Big scandals like the gutter oil meat thing exposed on the 3.155 show have had a lasting, severe impact on confidence in food processing generally.
Yeah, stuff like that sticks with people.
Third, understandable anxiety about improper temperature control during storage and transport. These are sensitive products. It affects safety and quality directly.
All pretty fundamental fears about food, but you mentioned a specific controversy. Pre-prepared food in schools. That sounds like a powder keg. What happened there?
The school controversy in September 2023 was definitely a major flashpoint. It was largely triggered by reports from Jiangxi and other areas about alarmingly poor quality school lunches, often from central kitchens. Parents reported yellowed, spoiled-looking vegetables, overly salty meat, worries about nutrition, lack of freshness. Many parents directly blamed the suspected use of pre-prepared food.
And I bet the parental response wasn't exactly calm and measured.
Massive understatement. The backlash nationwide was swift, overwhelmingly negative.
Huh.
Online polls showed over 80% disapproval of using pre-prepared in schools. Parents worried about additives, nutrient loss compared to fresh cooking, lack of freshness, lack of transparency about ingredients and methods, and just the overall risk to kids' health.
Yeah.
In some extreme cases, parents actually quit their jobs to make meals for their kids. That shows the depth of distrust and anxiety.
Wow, quitting jobs. That's a serious indictment of those school meals. What did the schools and officials say?
Responses were generally defensive. often denying using pre-prepared food as parents meant it, using a different definition focusing on non-packaged meals from central kitchens made same day. But these reassurances mostly failed to calm anxieties. Facing pressure, the Ministry of Education took a cautious stance, saying due to lack of unified standards and oversight, promoting pre-prepared in schools wasn't advisable then.
So authorities basically hit pause, but it sounds like this unearthed deeper systemic issues.
Absolutely. The school meal incident highlighted several bigger problems. It exposed the confusion around defining pre-prepared, especially regarding central kitchens. It underscored insufficient supply chain transparency, lagging regulations, and that deep parental distrust of school food safety overall. This single incident amplified public anxiety about pre-prepared food everywhere, not just schools. And it likely accelerated the 2024 regulations, which addressed key parental concerns like definition, preservatives, and disclosure.
So that school drama was a major catalyst, but not the only source of complaints, right? What else bugs consumers about these meals?
Yeah, other significant complaints too. A recurrent one is the gap between marketing and reality product doesn't match the picture or description. Unmet expectations.
The classic bait and switch.
Concerns about shrinkflation too, reducing quality or quantity over time while keeping the price. Inconsistent quality between batches or brands is another issue. And that taste issue we mentioned, the lack of wok hei, that smoky flavor vital in Chinese cooking, over 60% of consumers find flavor restoration needs improvement. Replicating traditional cooking is a huge challenge.
Right, the taste has to be there.
Plus ongoing worries about nutrition. Nutrient loss during processing, storage, reheating, high salt, oil, sugar, lack of fresh veggies in many products. And finally, just the perception of pre-prepared as unfresh, like leftovers. People show a preference for shorter shelf life options, suggesting they equate that with freshness.
Sounds like a clear message. Convenience is great, but not at the expense of taste, health, and honesty.
Yeah.
Now, you also said market fragmentation is part of the problem. How does having so many small players hurt quality and trust?
Fragmentation has several negative impacts. First, it leads to insufficient overall R&D investment. Smaller companies lack resources for big innovation in taste, nutrition, preservation tech. Second, it often fosters a race to the bottom on price, incentivizing corner cutting on ingredients or standards. Third, the regional nature of many small players, driven by local tastes and logistics limits, prevents strong national leaders emerging who could set higher standards and build trustworthy national brands. Without those bigger players setting benchmarks and investing in quality, it's harder to lift the whole industry's standards and confidence.
So, hard to get consistency and trust with tons of small, local players doing their own thing. Like trying to build a national cuisine when every regional chef insists their recipe is best, maybe while skimping on ingredients. Now, let's talk transparency or lack thereof. Consumers feel kept in the dark.
Crucial point. Transparency and the consumer's right to know are huge sources of frustration, fueling distrust. A big one is restaurants hiding their use of pre-prepared or semi-prepared ingredients. Consumers feel cheated, paying premium for what they think is fresh but is largely pre-made.
Yeah, I can see that.
Surveys show over 78% of consumers report suspecting or confirming non-disclosure in restaurants. It really erodes trust. Plus, labeling on consumer products often falls short. Missing or incomplete ingredient lists, unclear serving sizes, vague dates, sometimes no visible price. That recent dual labeling issue at Sam's Club, with conflicting info on the same item, underscores these transparency problems. Legally, under Chinese consumer law, people have a right to be informed. The anger over this lack of transparency is key to the distrust. That makes the 2024 push for mandatory disclosure in catering potentially pivotal for rebuilding trust, though how exactly that gets implemented is still being worked out.
So it's not just about the food quality, but basic honesty and respect. Sounds like the industry operated in a regulatory gray area. But you mentioned big changes in 2024. The government finally stepped in. What are the most impactful new rules?
The 2024 regulations really are a major turning point, a big effort to reset the industry and tackle these long-standing issues. Key transformative parts. First, that unified, clear definition and scope for pre-prepared food, foundational for oversight and understanding.
Right.
Second, and maybe biggest for consumers, the ban on adding preservatives to foods in that official definition. The rationale. Meeting consumer expectations for home-style food without additives, guiding the industry to higher quality, arguing tech like cold chain often makes preservatives unnecessary, and ultimately strengthening food safety.
So no added preservatives at all in that specific category.
In that defined category, yes. Third, promoting mandatory disclosure of pre-prepared ingredients by restaurants, a direct response to consumer demands for transparency, protecting their right to know.
Okay, clear definition, no added preservatives, mandatory disclosure. Sounds significant. Is that it, or is there more?
Beyond those three, the 2024 rules also strongly emphasize building a national standard system and strengthening supervision across the whole supply chain. The plan is unified national food safety standards covering production, cold chain, quality standards for terms and classification, encouraging alignment of existing standards with these national ones.
Okay.
On supervision, renewed emphasis on enterprises' primary responsibility.
Yeah.
Stricter production permit management, potentially raising entry barriers, more frequent inspections focusing on raw materials, processes, storage, transport, stricter penalties for violations, especially on cold chain rules. There are also calls for a full traceability system, letting consumers track meal origins, though that wasn't explicitly mandated initially.
So, building a much more robust, accountable framework, farm to fork or plant to plate. What's the industry reaction? Welcoming this or worried about the burden?
Generally, initial reaction has been cautiously positive. Many recognize the old lack of rules and trust issues were hindering long-term growth. They see this as necessary for a level playing field, fairer competition for compliant businesses, and crucially, restoring consumer confidence. There's a sense that a regulated, transparent market is ultimately more stable and sustainable.
But surely, complying, especially the preservative ban and disclosure, must be challenging, particularly for smaller guys.
Absolutely. Compliance means increased costs, operational changes. The preservative ban requires big investments in better cold chain, stricter hygiene, possibly different, pricier packaging to ensure safety and shelf life without additives.
Yeah, that's not cheap.
Mandatory disclosure in restaurants, while good for consumers, could be logistically complex, defining and communicating ingredient use clearly, especially in complex dishes. Higher entry barriers from stricter permits might weed out smaller, non-compliant firms lacking resources.
So consolidation.
Likely acceleration of industry consolidation. Larger companies are better positioned to invest and comply, could mean more M&A, might also see product structure shifts, maybe pressure on room temp foods that relied heavily on preservatives.
Sounds like these regulations are a real inflection point. If enforced well, maybe a turnaround in trust, a boost for C2C. If not, more stagnation.
Precisely. The ultimate effectiveness is crucial. Rigorous enforcement, tangible improvements in safety and transparency, that holds potential to rebuild trust and clear obstacles for C2C growth. But weaker, inconsistent implementation. The industry might keep grappling with the same fundamental problems, limiting development, staying reliant on B2B.
Okay, we've done a pretty deep dive into China's market. Now let's broaden our view. How does this fit into the bigger global picture? How does China compare to more established markets?
Yeah, to really get it, we need to compare China's dynamics with the global landscape, especially mature markets like North America, Europe, and others in Asia, like Japan.
So how big is this ready meal thing globally? Niche trend or a major industry component?
The global prepared meals market is substantial and growing. Estimates for 2021-2023 range roughly between $143 billion and $166 billion USD. Future projections see it climbing maybe $220 billion to even $355 billion USD by 2030-2032. The expected annual growth rate, CAGR, is generally between 4.6% and 10.6%, depending on the forecast source and segments.
Seriously, big numbers. So convenient meals are a global thing. What are the main trends shaping the global market? What's hot outside China?
Several key trends globally. Convenience is still fundamental, like in China, but there's a huge growing emphasis on health and wellness. Rising demand for organic, natural, plant-based, clean-label products with simpler ingredients.
Right.
Sustainability is increasingly important too, packaging impact, ethical sourcing. Digitalization and e-commerce keep expanding sales and distribution avenues globally, and a trend towards premiumization and innovation, people paying more for high-quality ingredients, novel flavors. Interestingly, that strong global focus on health and clean labels seems less prominent in China's current stage. Probably because China is still tackling basic safety and trust issues first.
So while the world moves to organic, sustainable, gourmet-ready meals, China's still focused on making sure the basic stuff is safe, reliable, accurately labeled. Makes sense. Regional differences. Different meals dominate different places.
Yes, distinct regional dynamics. North America is the largest market now. U.S. is a major consumer convenience and healthier options driving it. Europe is another big established market with strong demand, lots of innovation. Asia-Pacific is seeing the fastest growth. China and India are key drivers, large, urbanizing populations, changing lifestyles.
And you specifically mentioned Japan as a mature Asian market. What can China learn from their playbook?
Japan's compelling case study. High penetration rate, around 60% of households.
Mm-hmm.
Their C2C market is very well developed, bigger share than B2B, maybe 40.60 B2C. C2C shows strong consumer acceptance for home consumption.
Wow, 60%.
Per capita consumption is way higher too, around 18 kilograms per year. Japan's a leader in processing tech, packaging, strict quality control, product innovation, and efficient distribution, especially through those ubiquitous convenience stores.
Right, the konbini.
China could learn a lot for its C2C development, from Japan's success in addressing taste, ensuring quality, building trust through tech, convenience store partnerships, quality assurance, and strong branding.
So Japan seemingly cracked the code on getting convenient, trusted meals into homes at scale. China could definitely take notes, maybe open more convenience stores with better food options. Now, direct comparison. How does China really stack up against Japan, the U.S. on key metrics?
The penetration rates and market maturity differences are striking. China's 10–15% versus over 60% in developed markets like Japan and the U.S. The B2B CTC structure is a major contrast too. China's heavily B2B skewed. Japan has a much more balanced, mature C2C segment. China is generally seen as being in an earlier development stage compared to these evolved markets, where the focus is more on sophisticated segmentation, health, sustainability, differentiation.
So China still has a way to go getting these meals into average homes regularly. What about consumer attitudes? Different priorities in China versus the U.S. or Japan?
Yes, distinct differences.
Yeah.
Chinese consumers, as we said, highly value that woke flavor and prefer the taste texture of fresh cooking qualities. Pre-prepared meals struggle to replicate consistently.
That woke thing is really key, huh?
Seems so. There also appears to be maybe deeper skepticism towards processed foods in China, likely from past safety issues and a cultural emphasis on fresh ingredients. Plus, China's e-commerce landscape is unique, much more developed online grocery food delivery than many Western markets. The slower C2C growth in China is likely due to this mix of cultural factors, taste, cooking emphasis, and historical trust issues. Convenience alone isn't enough. Tailored solutions addressing these specifics are needed. And industry structure differs. China's fragmented with many small players. Global markets are more concentrated, with dominant large corporations having resources for R&D, branding. Innovation focus also differs. China's still largely on basic safety, standardization. Globally, it's shifted more to health, sustainability, gourmet offerings.
So it's not just about quick and easy. It's about quick, easy food that tastes right and people trust. A much more nuanced challenge. Now let's look ahead. What's the future likely hold for China's market? What strategic moves should players consider?
China's market is at a truly critical juncture. The new regulations bring immediate compliance challenges, but also huge long-term opportunities. If enforced effectively, we expect a gradual but crucial recovery in consumer confidence, potentially unlocking that massive C2C potential.
The
B2B will remain vital, though. We'll likely see faster industry consolidation as companies adapt. More focus on product innovation, improving taste, addressing health concerns, catering to regional preferences, developing better natural preservation tech.
So less reliance on artificial stuff.
That's the push. The next C2C competition will likely center on R&D-driven quality improvements, replicating woke texture, providing verifiable nutrition. Globally, expect continued strengthening of health, sustainability, digital integration, premiumization trends. Tech, like personalized nutrition, supply chain transparency will deepen. Asia-Pacific remains the key global growth driver.
So build trust, enhance quality, adapt strategically. Specific advice for different stakeholders.
For Chinese pre-prepared food companies, absolutely embrace regulation, prioritize transparency, invest heavily in R&D for quality-paced, healthier lines, strengthen supply chain, cold chain, build trustworthy brands, educate consumers, explore strategic partnerships, M&A.
And the regulators.
For Chinese regulators, paramount focus must be effective, consistent enforcement. Keep refining the national standard system. Promote traceability. Support industrial upgrading. Investors should focus on quality leaders, assess C2C potential carefully, monitor regulations and consumer sentiment closely.
What about global players looking at China?
Global enterprises entering China need a deep understanding of local preferences, regional differences. Strict adherence to Chinese regulations is non-negotiable. Consider local partnerships carefully. Ultimately, China's market is at a pivotal moment. Stronger regulation marks a new era. Future success depends on regulatory effectiveness, business self-discipline and innovation, and crucially, rebuilding consumer trust. Big challenges, but also exciting opportunities for sustainable growth.
Well, that was an incredibly insightful deep dive into China's pre-prepared food market. We've covered the explosive growth, the big regulatory changes, the B2B dominance, but huge C2C potential, the fragmented landscape, and the key differences and similarities compared to global markets. The undeniable recurring theme, it seems, is that while the appetite for convenience is there, the essential ingredients for success are building unwavering trust and delivering high-quality products that meet unique Chinese tastes. So here's a final thought to really chew on. Considering the immense potential but those persistent, deep trust issues, what will ultimately be the defining factor? What decides if pre-prepared food becomes a true staple in Chinese homes, like in Japan or the West? Will it be effective regulation, a tech breakthrough recreating woke hay or preserving nutrition, or just evolving consumer habits in a time-strapped world? It's a complex culinary equation, and we'll have to wait and see how it cooks up. Thanks for diving deep with us.